Yeah. There's something, almost off-putting when people just say it's a blanket right to own an animal.
Yeah.
Like there's something a little bit too domineering about that to me. It's like for some reason, as soon as you say that, there's like the respect for the animal sort of wanes for some reason. It's just like you've put yourself over them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why, there's that privilege to be able to keep them in. And I think there's something powerful about earning the privilege to keep an animal. And I don't mean necessarily earn privilege earn your privilege to the government, show them how good you are, but it's almost like earn it for the animal, show them how good you can create something for that individual rather than, because that's sort of the... Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. So today is a very special and exciting episode. We are launching another show under the Animals at Home network. That show is going to be called Project Herpetoculture, and it is hosted by Phillip Lietz and Roy Arthur Blodgett. Both have been guests on the podcast in the past, so you can go check out those episodes. I'll make sure they're in the show notes. And today we talk about their podcast. We bring them on. We have a great conversation just about herpetoculture in general. And then, of course, we talk about what they have in store for us with their podcast. I've already listened to a couple episodes, and it's amazing. You guys will love it. I'm super excited to have them in the fold of the Animals at Home network. And just like the other shows, Bryce Broom's show, Animals Everywhere, and Liam Sinclair and Ellie Hill's show, Reptiles and Research, the audio version will be housed on the Animals at Home network. So however you listen to your audio podcast, whether that's Spotify or Apple or any other podcasting app, you can subscribe to the network and you will automatically receive all the shows from all the different hosts under that one banner. If you are looking for the video version of those podcasts, you will go to the separate respective channels, either Animals at Home, Animals Everywhere, Reptiles and Research, and now Project Herpetoculture. So those will all be housed separately, but the audio is all underneath the Animals at Home network. And today is the day before we officially release Project Herpetoculture. So tomorrow, the first two episodes will go live, which I'm super excited to share with you, and then we'll have subsequent episodes after that. So you'll have to wait about 24 hours after listening to this to be able to listen to the first couple episodes. Before we jump into today's conversation, make sure you head to Animals at Home Network if you're looking for more information on this episode or any other podcast that's on this network. If you'd like to join us over on Patreon, you can do that for as little as $3 a month at patreon.com/animalsathome. And thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this video. If you're looking for a new reptile enclosure, make sure you head to one of the links below. Those are affiliate links. If you do make a purchase through one of those links, a small commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And of course, that helps me keep the lights on in this room and helps me support the show. Now, if you are watching on YouTube, you can see I do have two large custom reptile habitat enclosures behind me that are set up. That is going to be an entire project that we're going to talk about at some point in the future throughout the fall, and I can't wait to share that with you as well. But let's jump into this conversation now. More about that in the future. Enjoy this conversation with Roy and Phil. Roy and Phil, welcome back to the podcast. This might be the last time you're ever on this show.
No, don't say that.
No, maybe we'll have you back on. But I'm sure the viewers, listeners have picked up. I've had messages, people, as we were saying before off air, there's been some Easter eggs dropped around, and that you guys are going to be producing a show together that's going to be part of the Animals at Home network, and I cannot wait. I've already had the privilege of listening to a couple of the episodes, so it's really exciting, and we will talk about that a little bit later. But I do want to, why don't we catch ourselves up? You've each been on the podcast separately, so we do have, if anyone's interested in your particular backgrounds, how you got into reptile keeping, they can go there. But why don't we just get caught up on what you're working on right now, what projects you have in your room, and why don't we start with Roy?
Yeah, so since I was on your podcast, it's been quite a while now. It's been a few years, and things have grown drastically here, and got several projects going. I would say the kind of the major one right now is working with monkey lizards. The Polycrus marmoratus is the Latin name. And I've been kind of focused on those the last couple of years, getting those dialed in, and I have them bred and lots of babies right now, raising those up. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm also in the middle of a big move right now and getting ready to design and build a couple of small outbuildings for the reptiles specifically. So I'll be building a small temperate shed and a small tropical shed So I'm starting to turn toward that, and that's going to be consuming my life pretty soon here.
What about the puffing snakes? I know that last year I think you had you were close to getting a fertile clutch, but then you maybe lost the eggs. Yeah, you could fill us in on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So the puffing snakes are still here. It's still a core passion, and it's also been a kind of a fraught project in some ways. Like, I think that my male that I hatched when I was a teenager he's kind of past breeding prime. He's in his twilight years. He's got cataracts. He's slowing down, and he's about 14 going on 15 now. And so I think that like his breeding prime exit and the breeding prime entrance for my females, they kind of passed each other like ships in the night. Mm-hmm. And so the females started producing clutches every year. The last 3 years in a row they've laid, or at least one of them has laid. And then last year I had an interesting clutch that looks different than the 2 years prior. And so I incubated it. And after 112 days of incubation, none of the babies pipped, and that's well beyond. That's like about 2 weeks past the expected hatch time. So I actually cut an egg to see what was going on, and it revealed essentially a deformed neonate puffing snake, and all of the eggs were like that. And I think that my kind of hunch out of that was that it was actually a result of parthenogenesis. I've been in conversation with a few other people, and just the kind of some of the characteristics of the neonates that were in the egg seem to suggest that. So that was disappointing to say the least, but also really interesting in a lot of ways. And then this year, both of my females laid. So this is the first year that both the adult females laid. The younger one has now caught up to breeding age, and she produced a clutch this year. And what was really interesting is that they laid within 12 hours of each other. They were just perfectly synced up. So they shed within 12 hours of each other, their pre-oviposition shed. And they actually chose the same nesting site. So they were actually nesting together, cuddled up.
Wow.
And the first female dropped her clutch, and my immediate impression was like, these are probably not fertile. But I took them and put them in the incubator anyway. And then the second female laid her clutch, and they were very clearly not fertile. And so I didn't even bother incubating those. But this first clutch, this is the first time that female has laid, and I think it may be another parthenogenetic clutch, because the eggs, they don't look like typically healthy, perfect, fertile colubrid eggs in my experience of having had those in the past. But they also don't look like, they're not like obvious slugs either. And now that these eggs are in the incubator, they've been in the incubator, I'm looking at them right now for a week, and they haven't grown any mold. They actually look a lot nicer now. They look more fertile than the day they were laid. And so I'm really curious to see what happens with these. I'm like, at this stage, I've been kind of a little bit conditioned for disappointment with this project, to be honest. But I'm really curious at this point. Like, okay, is this what's going to happen with these? Are they going to go full term, and maybe it's a parthenogenetic clutch that the babies actually are fully formed and they hatch on their own and all that, or is it going to be another situation like last year? I'm trying not to like get too attached to the outcome and just like enjoy the process of it. And then next year I think will be really interesting, because I have a juvenile male that I've been raising. I got as a hatchling in the end of 2020. And next year he will be of breeding size. And he's a really interesting looking puffing snake. I've never seen another one that looks like him. He's got this incredible kind of mahogany redwood banding on him, and this like gunmetal colored tail, and just unusual color variation on him. So I'm really curious to see what it'll be like to introduce him next year, a new male that's entering his breeding prime, and see if that results in different outcomes. Because yeah, up to this point, I think that just with my other male, there's just been I haven't witnessed any courtship, and he's just pretty. He behaves like a kind of like an old snake does. He's a little bit slower and more lethargic, and he's still
retired.
Yeah, he's retired. Exactly, he's enjoying his retirement. But I'm really curious to see what this younger male might do. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, our fingers are definitely crossed for you there. And
Thanks.
Phil, you were on the podcast more recently, and it's actually one of the most popular episodes ever on the podcast. I think I was just looking at it, popped up on my analytics thing this morning. It's like 50,000
for
views
good
on
reason.
YouTube almost. Yeah, it was a great episode. Yeah, and it's people have really enjoyed that episode. And so I'm not sure if has anything changed within the last year. Do you have new projects you're working on, or have you expanded or keeping the same tempo?
Yeah, things here are pretty much the same. The only things I could note that have changed a little bit have been, I am doing a little bit more with the Xenogama. So, the Xenogama tayleri, shield-tailed agamas. When we recorded, I'd only bred them maybe a handful of times, and had a relatively small number, I don't remember exactly how many I had at the time, but it was just maybe a couple of pairs. And now I've held back and had second generation captive bred animals here, as well as grown that small colony to something closer to like 8 or 9 pairs of Xenogama tayleri. And the other thing is that I'm slightly reducing the total number of Uromastix species that I keep. So previously it was kind of working with all of them, like everything I could get my hands on. It was where I was kind of most interested, and now I'm narrowing my focus just a little bit. So primarily hanging on to and growing the ornate colony in particular, Thomasi princeps, yemenensis, nigroventris, and then I have my solo pair of Egyptian Euros, the Uromastix aegyptia. And I have a couple of chuckwallas, a couple of Nephrus amii, a few little odds and ends, some cacrics, but other than that, it nothing too fancy or too new to report, other than just a little bit of shifting of stuff over here.
Well, one thing that's interesting about the both of you is you almost have a yin and yang as far as the species that you keep. So yeah. I'm curious what draws you to, because Phil, you're obviously arids only. You are an arid person. You keep arid, and then Roy, you tend to have a little more tropical species. Is there? And maybe we'll start with Phil. Is there something specific about that environment that draws you to species there, or what is it? And I'm going to ask the same thing to Roy after.
Sure. Yeah. So there's probably a few things. The first would be, probably selfishly, it was stuff that I had success with early on. It was something about the desert reptiles, desert lizards in particular, was just, it felt natural to me. Colorado is a desert basically, and a prairie, but dry as hell. And so it just seemed somewhat natural, but also almost all of the field herping I've done has been in the desert, of mostly in the American Southwest. And I love that environment. I mean, there's something about the sort of really mysterious, I don't want to say psychedelic, because that's not necessarily the word I'm going for, but like, there's a rich psychedelic history in the American Southwest, right? So there is some weird, almost alien or spiritual or
mystique.
Yeah, there's a mystique. That's the right word. There's a mystique to the deserts, and I feel like it's also such a contrast to me, like to see the kind of animals that you see in the desert. I mean, granted, they fit in and they look like they should exist there, but they're so audacious and gaudy. Like an ornate Uromastix is visually very loud, and that is quite distinct from the environment. The environment tends to be, neutral colors, grays, browns, earth tones, and everything is looking to hide most of the time because it's just so you can get spotted so easily. Yet with things like Euros, collared lizards, Xenogama, different iguanas, I mean, they stand out like a sore thumb, especially something like an ornate or like a Dickerson's collared lizard, or take your pick of that. So there's something about those animals that I'm just drawn to, and I feel like I relate to them better. And I've worked with a handful of tropical species, and I love them all. there's like some sort of cognitive disconnect for me between the way I'm looking at and thinking about the animals and the things that they need. So, and at this point, eventually I'll have pet projects that help me overcome that. But for now, anyway, just the desert feels like where I'm going to thrive.
So it's not that you just can't keep plants alive.
No, that's also that's what is the opposite of a green thumb? Because that's what I have.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Dylan just cutting to the core there.
Yeah. And Roy, what about you? Because you kind of are on the other side. You're more of a humid tropical specialist.
Yeah. Well, honestly, truthfully, one of the things that really draws me to herpetoculture is working with animals that inhabit different ecological niches. And, I think that originally I kind of started working with the tropical stuff because I really wanted to work with the puffing snakes again after working with those as a teenager. And then that kind of led me to be considering what else would do well in the room that I'm tailoring for the puffing snakes, essentially. And so I started looking at other species in the Guyana Shield region where they're native to. And that's what led me to the monkey lizards and the Uranoscodon, and then the Phrynonax polylepis, which is another species that I have here that I actually haven't even announced really publicly, apart from right now.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, I have a really, really special example of that species that just is like unlike any other I've ever seen. So I'm excited to share that with the broader community soon. But anyway, and then the other room, the temperate room, is there's a little bit more diversity expressed actually, and it's all stuff that kind of does well with general kind of parameters within general parameters. But like I have some stuff from like the Gran Chaco region of South America. That's the tricolor hognose snakes, and that's kind of a savanna grassland thorn scrub region of South America. But I also have stuff from kind of montane Mexico in the form of the Xenosaurus, and some of the Texas alligator lizards are kind of from the Edwards Plateau, the oak woodlands of central Texas down into Mexico. And so those species all kind of fit well together in that room. But I would say that just generally I am drawn to species. I kind of somewhat arbitrarily have made a rule for myself that I'm only working with species from the Western Hemisphere because I have to narrow it down some way. And if I had to choose like two regions of the world where the herpetofauna is really inspiring to me, it would probably be Mexico, Central America, and then the Amazon, essentially the broader Amazon region. And so those are kind of the two areas that I have the most focus, and also, as someone who loves biodiversity and is really interested in, again, all these different ecological niches and how they're expressed in these animals, those are two of the most rich regions in the world in terms of herpetofauna. So I get to be spoiled with options there of stuff to work with that will do well here, hopefully.
Yeah, you didn't narrow it down too much. Just narrow it down to the most biodiverse, rich place in the world, and that should be totally fine.
Exactly. Then I've got plenty of options still. But I think I could get myself in trouble with looking into like African colubrids. I really love a lot of I love thrassops and and a lot of the species, Toxicodryas, a lot of those species over there. And I also would definitely fall down the rabbit hole of Asian agamids. I can easily see myself doing, but I'm not going to do that.
No, that's good. So I'm curious because when we sit here and we talk about what we're keeping and the animals that, how we keep and our sort of vision of herpetoculture, I just think I actually don't know where this question is going, but I sort of have a vague idea. What is the over, because it almost seems like we have this extra layer of purpose, all three of us and most people who are listening to this, a purpose when it comes to keeping these reptiles. It's not just I have a pet lizard. There's something more. Of course, there's the quantity and whatnot, but there's something more there's a deeper thing going on here that I think we're all trying to promote and trying to sell in a way, because this deeper connection that you have to these animals is what makes us enjoy them so much. But does anyone know what I'm referring to? Like, what is that deeper sense of purpose? Like, where is that coming from? And why don't we treat this stuff as just like simple pets?
Yeah. Phil, do you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Sorry. So I think there's a few things happening. The one that I come back to very, very frequently, and I've made kind of posts about this on my Instagram, and I've talked about a little bit already on our show, is I think there's art involved in this. It's like call it what you will, whether it's a type of fine art, whether it's a type of art or communion that would resemble some sort of pastoralist farming or fish farming type of thing. There's something that feels creative and expressive and interpretive in the process that feels like it adds this other layer of richness to what we do. And I think it's something that maybe isn't discussed as much in herpetoculture. It's not non-existent, but it's not broadly discussed. And then additionally, I think that there's something there's like a curiosity in focusing and developing your craft through that artistic pursuit that reveals insights, not just about the animals that you're interested in and the places where they come from, but also reveals a little bit about yourself and your place in the world and the animal's place in the world and how different systems work and how different, the results and consequences of certain changes to the systems you have in place. Seeing those broad effects on what you do is a little bit scientific. And in my mind, it resembles focusing in on any given industry in the same way that one might pursue, say, a doctorate. But there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can be a medical doctor. You can get a PhD in philosophy. You can get a PhD in economics. I mean, there's the doctorate label is a big umbrella, as herpetoculture is. It's a huge, broad umbrella, and being able to focus in on any one given section of that, no matter how broad or how specific, I think kind of entails those two things, science and art, kind of mixed into the same pursuit.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer. Roy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think that's definitely true for me, that there's kind of a merging of art and science in herpetoculture that is really stimulating and gratifying and just kind of limitless. Like, there's this feeling of you can never plumb the depths of this practice. It's ever unfolding. And if you come to a place where you feel as though you've plumbed the depths, you should probably reassess. But I think also there's this way in which I think that this is something we've spoken about in the past, Dylan, and also I think Phil and I have talked about this a bit too, is that I think in some ways herpetoculture offers something of an antidote to some of the ails of just like modern civilization.
Totally.
Being that like we are, we're these, I often, joke that we're these like Pleistocene animals that are living in this post-Pleistocene era. In a lot of ways, biologically, we haven't changed a great deal from our origins, and yet we're living drastically different lives than we were 15,000 years ago. And I think in some ways we have a lot of, particularly, I guess just speaking to modern culture in North America, which is all I can really speak to firsthand, there are a lot of issues I think that people have stemming from kind of like disconnection and isolation. And I think that herpetoculture offers a novel way to kind of balm those ails and those illnesses, so to speak, and provides kind of an interesting solution to those problems in the modern world.
Yeah, no, I think I think you guys both hit that on the head. Like there's probably nothing more potent as far as an experience goes as actually creating something, like making something come into existence with your own hands. Like, it's funny when you make something, whether it's in your reptile room or otherwise, and you just can't stop looking at it. Like, you'll just come down and just look at it again. My father-in-law this past weekend and myself, for some reason, we decided to fix up his shed, and the interior shed is just like regular studs with plywood, and we had this old like knotty pine wood that was from an old cabin. So we're like, we should just line some of this. And then it just got carried away. We're like, okay, let's add some trim and like do this whole thing. And it was just like, we spent 2 days making the back of a shed look really nice for absolutely no reason at all. It looked like the set of a home garden TV network show or something. And it was just so fun. Like, there was something so enjoyable about it. And that's when you learn the best, when you're in those moments where you're challenging yourself, like trying to, like, I've never done any finishing carpentry. We're like learning that as we go. And it's almost like, that's the main selling point of keeping reptiles. Like like you said, Roy, getting that antidote to being stuck in a concrete jungle, like that is so huge, and then being able to exist with nature, but also having that access to creation. And I bet a lot of mental health issues we have in our society is people that no one is creating, and people think that, oh, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, I don't do this, I don't do that. Well, there's so many ways you can be creative, and if you happen to have a passion for animals, this is a perfect outlet for you, so you don't get stuck. Like, I mean, we all get stuck on Instagram, like flipping through reels, and you go, what the hell, you just lost 30 minutes of my day doing nothing, like actually melting, basically, rather than, like this last week or so, my wife and my son are at the cabin, so I have to be here because I'm working, and so I have like all this time in a day to just do these enclosures. Like I'm redoing my entire reptile room, and I can go like 15 hours straight without eating, looking at my phone, or doing anything, because you just get stuck in that mode, and it's amazing.
Yeah, that's been my baseline lately.
Yeah.
Between reptile care and cabin renovation, it's just, who needs to eat?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll eat tomorrow.
And there's also this other weird phenomenon that I've noticed that's related to what you were just saying, Dylan, which is that so this is these last few years is the first time where my animals have been separate from my home, and so one thing I took for granted when they were at my home is how often I just went and hung out with them. I just go in and just go chill out in the reptile room for no reason. There's no direction. There's no purpose. It's just chilling. And one thing I've realized is after like the first year here, I really started to miss that here at the shop. And so I've started to just kind of engineer that into my time here because it was really important. That was where a lot of observation happened and a lot of new insights happened. Right. And so, but it's been a little bit weird to kind of explain that to my family. So my fiance, I'll be like, well, I gotta go. I'm gonna head back up to the shop, or I'm gonna go up to the shop today, or whatever. When I thought, it's like the work's all done. And she's like, oh, what do you have to do? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't really
look at lizards.
Do. Yeah, just gotta go look at the lizards, man. Pork chop is bored, I'm sure. Like,
yeah.
Pork chop needs to bite my toes.
Yeah, for real, man. He does, and he will try.
Yeah,
I'm in that right now. This is the first time in the last couple of years that I haven't had the reptiles at home, and they're also an hour-long commute away from me right now. And I've been really grappling with that, of figuring out, like, how do I get that? Because it's also, for me, like really regulating and therapeutic to just be in like my reptile room and just have time to tinker and observe them. And so I'm doing the same thing. Like, okay, how can I just plan that in, that like, all right, when I go into town, I'm making a whole day of it so I can have a spacious amount of time to be with the animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when you've set things up in a way that you're happy with. Like my problem is that, after a couple of weeks, things either degrade physically or they just degrade in your mind, where you look at an enclosure and you start picking out things. I can do this better, I should do that better, whatever. And then you end up getting anxiety because of it. Yes. But once you've set something up that you're so happy with, there's that experience where you can just look at something that you've created. You see the animal using a feature that you designed for it, and yeah, it's just calming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
We're at this weird point in reptile keeping, though, where it seems like we're starting to get closer and closer to it being taken away or potentially being threatened. And we'll talk about your podcast later, but you did the episode with Ron St. Pierre, and I really enjoyed learning. It's always amazing when you hear people talk about the early days and how insane those early reptile days are, like how it started. And it's just changed so much since then. But now we're getting all these bills coming up, these different bans. Like, do you guys think that we are in a final era of reptile keeping, or is this something that we can reverse and grow out of?
Well, I have some initial thoughts, but I would defer to Roy in this case. I think, unless, yeah.
I don't. It's a really interesting question, and I think that I kind of oscillate a little bit on this. There are times when I feel like, oh my God, this is under threat, and we're, it's existential, to some extent. And I think that honestly, to some degree, is fueled by maybe excessively reactionary takes on social media. When these things arise, people, they get worked up into a fervor and are like, wow, we need to donate to USARK. And like, if you're not donating to USARK, like, unfriend me right now.
I'm gonna come slash your tires, you idiot.
And while I do think it's important, and I donate to USARK, and all of that stuff, I also think that, there's a degree to which some of the regulation that's being introduced does make sense. And some of it also doesn't. And that's the unfortunate bummer with that kind of thing, is that, like, I think that what we really need as a community is better PR, better lobbyists, essentially, to so that the kind of regulation that's coming through is actually sensical, and because there are serious limitations to, like, how well a private hobbyist can keep certain species, and they probably shouldn't have such ready access to certain species, I think. And that's maybe a controversial opinion to take.
Sorry.
Phil has COVID.
Poor guy. And that's nothing against, the people that keep those things, or the people that are doing well with those things and doing it right, but they are definitely in the minority. And so, I honestly, I don't know that I have a clear answer on that. I think that my opinion on it can kind of vary, but I will say that generally speaking, I think that there is a trend toward increasing regulation, increasing pressure, and my hope is that we can, as a community, better represent ourselves to correspond, be part of that conversation with those who seek to regulate this, so that it can be done in a way that makes sense for everybody. And I think that one thing that Ron said in our podcast with him, which is upcoming for listeners to enjoy, it's an excellent one. Is he said, regulators need something to regulate. It's not in their best interest for this to disappear completely, because they actually make their bottom line to some extent by the perpetuation of this thing, so that they have something to do. And I think there is some truth to that. So what about you, Phil?
Yeah. So, well, I want to say first that I agree with pretty much everything Roy said there. All of that resonates very clearly with me. I also sympathize with both sides of this argument. I have sympathies that go something like, I am sympathetic to people's right to work with what they want to work with, people's right to sort of commercialize what they want to commercialize within ethical boundaries, right? I also sympathize with the need and desire to regulate, not just on an institutional level, but on a private public level, because all too often we see, we all have other pets too. I got a dog right here, and there's there's laws that tell you what you can and can't do with this dog. And I think that's probably a good thing, right? Because we've all seen those crazy shows where you see the kinds of jackasses who will mistreat their animals and think they can get away with it and that kind of thing. So there's certainly a healthy balance to be struck between reasonable, pragmatic regulation and the maximum amount of individual liberty that you can have in conjunction with one another. I think I'm really agnostic as to what that will look like on the ground and on paper, because number one, I just don't think many of us in this industry have enough knowledge about all of it to say what would be best for it, because, you know, it's probably going to be the case that the kind of regulation that works well for reticulated pythons is not going to work well for leopard geckos, right? So it'd be very, you know, it's in my mind, it's very difficult to make umbrella regulation without a pretty substantial institution behind that. Now, I have kind of fantasies or hypotheses about what the future might look like after we've resolved some of these problems. And I have suspicions that it will probably look like a reduction in the total number of animals that are available, period. And that'll probably be a combination of not just what you can and cannot get legally, but also what makes sense to have, you know? So, and again, I don't want to upset anybody by saying that you shouldn't have retics or croc monitors or whatever, but I kind of feel like you shouldn't have them privately. I mean, that's just my personal feelings, right? That doesn't reflect the opinions of the Animals at Home Network or anything. You know what I mean? It's not like that. It's
this man?
Yeah. How dare you, sir? You know, like it's not like that. It's just that, or at the very least, there should be many, many hoops for you to jump through in order to keep those animals, right? Something that resembles really effective gun legislation or something like that, which is obviously a whole nother topic. But and I don't know exactly what all that would look like, but I just feel like my hunch is that the future in 100 years, it's going to look like a way, way smaller list of things that we have, but the trade-off will be, it'll probably be higher level of care, like higher level base standard of care for those animals that we can keep, probably a lot more information and a lot more effort and dynamism that goes into each of those individual animals, and how they're cared for and why they are where they are in the country, and the kinds of people that work with them and the kinds of management that goes around maintaining those animals in captivity. So my hope would be that it looks something like the way that dog breeds are perpetuated and regulated on an international level. Maybe not, it's not perfect. I know that's not perfect either. And there's a lot of issues. Like the whole captive animal, regardless of whether it be reptiles or amphibians or mammals or whatever it is, all of it probably has some level of overhaul necessary, right? But I kind of am excited for that in a way, because even though I am very jealous of the Ron St. Pierres of the world who remember the true Wild West of herpetoculture, that's intriguing for so many reasons. I think that I am very excited for if and when it's maybe a reduced pool of options, but there might be a lot of iteration within those individual options and a lot of development inside that, right? So I think I find that personally very exciting, because I'd like to see a greater, emphasis on, again, bringing up the baseline standard of care and balancing, protecting natural habitat, right? There's got to be it doesn't seem impossible for there to be some great balance between all of those things, although I probably would be foolish to try to suggest what those things may or may not be from me, because I just don't, I personally don't know enough, I think.
Yeah. There's something, almost off-putting when people just say it's a blanket right to own an animal. Like there's something a little bit too domineering about that to me. It's like for some reason, as soon as you say that, there's like the respect for the animal sort of wanes for some reason. It's just like you've put yourself over them. But that's why, there's that privilege to be able to keep them in. And I think there's something powerful about earning the privilege to keep an animal. And I don't mean necessarily earn privilege earn your privilege to the government, show them how good you are, but it's almost like earn it for the animal, show them how good you can create something for that individual, rather than, because that's sort of the knee jerk reaction is we have a right to have whatever we want. And like, I can have 50 snakes, like who cares? And it's just like, that doesn't seem respectful to the individual animal that you are keeping in a container. There's no other way to look around it.
It's completely insufficient rationale. I mean, I'm right there with you. I get, and again, I'm very sympathetic to that concept, right? Like you should, obviously people should have the freedom to do the things they want to do, but it's like, you probably can't have 40 children with, you know what I mean? Like you probably shouldn't have 40 kids in a 2-bedroom house either, right? Like, it's not that simple, right? It's not a simple, like, this is just my right, damn it. It's like, well, okay, this is a living creature, dude. Like it's not a toy. It's not a car. Be Jay Leno and have warehouses full of cars all you want. But if you're going to have warehouses full of snakes, they should probably be happy, like I agree. It is a totally insufficient logic in my opinion.
Yeah. There can be a real air of just entitlement to that kind of rationale. I think that, it totally disregards the animal welfare side of things, and just reverence for other life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I also want to say that I think some of the things that make Roy and I a good team for the podcast is because we have some similarities intellectually and in terms of sort of some broad overarching worldview stuff, but we also have a lot of real divergences in the way we see certain aspects of keeping, real divergences in the kind of limits that we might put on, hypothetically anyway, on the limits that we might put on what we think is and is not acceptable or ethical in terms of broad care. We work with totally different kinds of animals from one another. And as much as I say things personally, like, I don't think people should really keep a lot of retics, or there should be a really high bar for keeping retics, or there should be a really high bar for keeping like a croc monitor or a savanna monitor, or a black throat monitor, whatever all that might be. I'm also really sympathetic to the people who want to keep those animals and why they think they should and can. Like, I don't want to, my interest isn't to exclude anybody. I want to bring more people in, because we were talking about legislation a second ago. The more people we have involved in herpetoculture, the harder it's going to be to legislate us away. And I think that's inevitable. I think it's just inevitable, because the number of people who message me through Instagram or wherever who say, I went over to my friend's house and I met his bearded dragon and it was really cool and I want to get a lizard. Great. Awesome. Like it's the normalization of that. The more people that I meet who when they find out what I do, don't go, you do what? Yeah. Who say, oh, no way. That's sick. I had a corn snake when I was 10 or whatever. That's awesome. And I think there's room for everybody, but we cannot ignore the ways that people will abuse absolute freedom. I mean, it's just the way it is. I think
that's really well said.
Yeah. And I kind of like that, picture, the future that you're painting as far as what the future might look like. And in a lot of ways, the content that gets put out, this podcast, your podcast is a foundation for some of these things moving forward. Like we are struggling with, legislation and whatnot, and the walls might be getting tighter, but we also have this great opportunity to bring people into that fold. And sometimes, I wonder, like, do I romanticize what the future looks like? Like we talked about before, selling that sort of creative aspect of herpetoculture. Can you get someone to realize how much purpose and fulfillment you can get from caring for a lizard? Is somebody who walks into PetSmart looking for that, or are they just looking for a lizard to feed crickets to, every couple of days? I don't know. Do you think that are people going into these, impulse purchase or these chain pet stores? Would they be drawn to this message, and how do we get them there?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I can speak from experience that I have many people contact me who say exactly those words. Like, I went and I thought I was going to buy like an easy throwaway pet, and I delved into it because I saw this animal suffering from the way I was caring for it, and I changed everything. Now, obviously, you get the opposite of that too. You get people who don't care or don't pay attention, but there's so many different entry points. Like, whether it's the person who's had a dozen other lizards and never committed to them fully and kept them well, and then they get their first ornate uromastyx and everything changes, or the people who have never even owned a pet of any kind, and they come in at the upper end where they're putting $1,500 into a setup for one animal that's just going to be their pet for 40 years. I mean, there's so many entry points into this style of herpetoculture, and I think that the more ways we can view the world less through a scarcity mindset and more through a mindset of abundance, and the acknowledgement that there's opportunity for everybody in various different ways and in various different entry points. And as you said, I think our show is going to be one of those things. I mean, it's one of the reasons we started it, because I think that, I mean, I know we didn't like officially transition to this topic or anything, but I really think that there's an open field for people who want to help increase the ways that we educate ourselves as a community, both newcomers and longtime participants. And I think that there's a general, with some exceptions, of course, Dylan, like your show and a handful of other folks who are making content that it isn't just an inch deep. It's philosophically, ethically, and intellectually rich, and in a way that is not putting up more barriers, but actually breaking those barriers down and allowing more people to access that level of participation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I think one of the reasons my podcast in particular has become so popular is because it really does give keepers the tools for what they can do to change themselves, rather than like, this is exactly how, I don't have very many podcasts, if any, that, outline how to care for a species, but it's like, how do you look at caring for a species, and what are some things that you can change in order? And so I think that's attractive to people. It's like, because you want to fix yourself too. And that kind of helps you understand how to tackle things better. So I would love to talk about the podcast. And so why don't we start with where did the idea come from? Was it one of you that came up with it first, or what's the genesis story?
Well, again, I'm sorry, Roy. I feel like I'm just cutting you off, but so Roy and I had chit-chatted a little bit here and there after a different podcast that I was on with Eddie Soto, Ron St. Pierre, and Paul McIntyre. We were doing an episode, and we were mentioning Roy and kind of the level of keeping that he's displaying and the cool work he's doing. And I somehow erroneously, mistakenly thought he was in the UK. I don't know why. I just was like, all those Europeans, man, they're just killing the herp game, and I don't know what it was, but it led to me and him kind of connecting and just shooting the shit about general stuff and sharing our mutual respect for one another. And without, at the risk of sounding like I'm trying to take too much credit, I had been considering starting a podcast for a long time, but I didn't really know what it would look like. And I actually, as a matter of fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, I had mentioned starting some kind of podcast to one or two friends of mine, and specifically about reptiles. And they were like, no way, dude, there's no market for that. That sounds ridiculous or whatever. I mean, they weren't like totally mean about it, but they really were vocal about the fact that they were like, I don't think you'll have any audience at all. And so then, flash forward to today, or when not only was there obviously a hunger for a podcast of any kind, right? But then the idea to reach out to Roy was just obvious, like who better, frankly, like, oh no, dude, that train might be coming. You'll hear it if it does, and I'll just stop talking. But talking with Roy, seeing the way he's doing his work was just obvious to me. Like, oh, I definitely like, this is the guy to talk to, he's going to balance out any kind of perception or view that I have with a view that's either more educated in various ways or with an alternative perspective. And I reached out to him and asked him if he'd even be interested, and he was just like, hard yes. Yeah. What was your perspective of that, Roy?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the story. Yeah, thanks for the kind words, man. It was
yeah.
You know, I don't know if I can live up to all that, but yeah, I think that you had mentioned like, yeah, I'm kind of thinking of doing a podcast thing, and then we were messaging, I think, on Instagram about it, and I was like, yeah, there's just this huge gulf, you know, that of terrain that needs to get covered on this subject, and then you were just kind of like, so let's do this. And I was like, eyeball emoji back to you. I think, you know, kind of like, all right, I'm in. And I think that's really well said. I think that we just have a good, there's a good balance between the two of us, you know, in covering a lot of the terrain there. And I think that really the big thing though is that you and I clearly have a mutual passion for herpetoculture, as a practice, as a devotional practice, as an art practice, as a science project, as a life, you know, project. It's a deep enterprise for us in a lot of ways. And I think that, you know, we think about it on like a deeper level a lot of the time. You and I have clearly both spent a lot of time like sitting there being like, why is it that I dedicate many hours of my life every week, every day to lizards? And so I think that there's a way in which it's just a natural fit for us.
Sorry about the train. That.
Oh yeah, no worries. Trains happen.
My shop is right next to a train track, and that train comes by like 5-6 times a day, something like that. And I'm always trying to kind of plan around it. And normally it wouldn't be a big deal if the door was shut, but it's so hot right now, I cannot have the door shut. I would die.
Yeah. No worries.
Anyway,
well, we'd rather you stayed alive.
Yeah. Right.
We need you. It is. It's a really interesting sort of yin and yang, because you know you both sort of highlighted this. You both have similarities. You're both artists in your different way. Like Roy, for those who don't know, is an incredible writer and a poet, and I don't know if you practice any other forms of art. And Phil is an actual drawing artist with an incredible drawing there. But then there are these differences, and maybe this is off base, but this is sort of how I sort of conceptualize. Phil seems more big picture, and then Roy seems more small picture in the way where you're looking at the sort of the minute details to things. Does that seem like a very simple characterization? Like I see Phil as a broad, looking at things at a very broad scale, and you know when you were on my podcast, for example, Phil, you were talking about like gut biome and bacteria. Like you were looking at these like really like out there concepts, which you need to have a broad outlook on things to be able to pull those in, where Roy is more detailed. I don't know. Is that a mischaracterization, do you think?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty on point. Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I love to explore all of that bigger picture stuff too, and get into the nitty gritty of like everything that herpetoculture encompasses, which is part of, again, why I find it so stimulating. But I definitely am someone that can get lost in the minutia. For sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we each probably have maybe like a different combo of those two things. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when I think about specificity, for me, Uromastyx and Xenogomma are the only things I can think about, you know, and it's not that I don't have interests in other things. It's just that for what I like, they fit everything for me. But, I have quite intense ADD. And so it's very hard for me to stick on one topic for more than a broad stroke in some ways. I mean, again, it depends a little bit on the topic, but so it just tends to follow the theme of my intellectual curiosities in the first place, I tend to, I'll read a book about, how the hand is structured anatomically and how that allows us to do certain things that allowed us to evolve to become humans. And then while I'm reading that book, I won't even finish it before I found a list of 3 other books through that book that I should read. And it's on a different topic, and I'll go on that. And then it's also like, okay, how do I take these sort of broader concepts and apply them to what I do? And 99% of the time, there's no application at all. But every now and again, you'll find one. You find like this one little teeny nug of really great insight that's like, oh, damn, I should do that with the Euros or whatever it might be. And so, no, I don't think that's a mischaracterization at all. And again, I think that plays into some of the things that are going to make us a great team for the show. Because I think it's going to, like one of the things we want to do is we don't want to just speak with herpetoculturists, even though herpetoculture is the broad overarching theme. We'd really like to have aviculturists, aquaculturists, and the like on the show. I mean, I'd love to have a long conversation with someone who's an insect farmer, right? Or like, someone who specifically works with coral reef in captive settings to try to figure out how to fix, because even if 1 out of every 10 of those kinds of shows reveals something applicable to herpetoculture, that's worth it. That is so worth it, because there's that old saying that you can't create art in a vacuum. Art doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I don't think, even though herpetoculture is going to get better by letting every herpetoculturist of every variety have a voice, herpetoculture is not going to grow just by self-reference. We need other kinds of input. Even people who don't have anything to do with herpetoculture specifically, I think will be useful. And granted, it won't be the norm. Like, we're not going to have a million of those shows. We're going to have a lot of them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's that's why it works so well. You need the person who can look at things broadly, and that way you can connect and relate different ideas that are sort of out there together, and then you need the person to finish the book on how the hand evolved. You kind of like sort of need both. And to talk on that point, I had mentioned earlier that the episode you and I recorded together, Phil, was here comes the train again. Well, I had said earlier that the episode that you and I recorded together, Phil, was the second most popular episode on the podcast, and the first one is an episode about hermit crabs.
That's awesome.
So by a fair margin, and I think the hermit crab community really liked it, but also I think the reptile community really liked it because there's so much information that you can pull from someone else keeping animals in a very different way, and we can extract all that information. And I'm actually happy to hear I understand the inside joke about you thinking that Roy is from England now, because I think you opened up the first or second episode, talking about Roy from the UK. I'm like, why does he think that? I thought maybe like the last name, because one of the things, like for me, I always Roy's last name, I always put like a French spin on it, like Blodgett. Yeah. Because I'm just so used to, anything that ends with these T's in Canada, it's like always a French thing. So I thought maybe that's what it was. But anyway, it was someone.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that before I knew Roy, I always heard his name as Roy Arthur Blodgett.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is a very Arthurian name. Like it's all Welsh Gaelic. My whole name, all three is Welsh Gaelic. So,
and it's kind of a compliment to think that your keeping looks like your European keeping style. So that's good too.
Yeah, I wasn't offended at all. I just thought it was really funny.
Well, I think Roy, you had contacted me about potentially, putting the podcast on the Animals at Home network, and for me, someone who is competitive at heart, I'm like, yes. Yeah. Like they're gonna do an awesome podcast, and I want to be involved in some way and bring them into the fold and help them make this great show. And I would think like, oh, if they're out there on their own, this is gonna be an amazing show. And I it's nice to all be in the same house and be able to share listeners and share subscribers and grow that way. And I'm very excited to once everybody else has started to listen. Are there things right off the top of your head that each of you want to achieve with the podcast?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, a lot of it is just wanting to broaden and deepen the kind of conversations that we're having around herpetoculture. I mean, that sounds really ambitious and maybe a bit arrogant to say, but but I think that like that's what I'm longing for. I think that and I feel indebted, honestly, Dylan, to you and your show in a lot of ways, because it has been it's provided a lot of fodder, brain fodder for me in that regard, and I want more. I'm greedy. And so I think that my hope with our show is that we can kind of, broaden, deepen some of the conversations. And also I think that for me, just on a personal level, I have an ambition to be contributing something to herpetoculture while I'm here, and I know that like, my life isn't just for me. I want to be in service to greater things than myself. And I feel really indebted to herpetoculture. I've spoken at length about this in the past, and I think in our episode that we did, Dylan, and I want to be giving back while I'm here. So I want to be contributing something to the field of knowledge that herpetoculture is, and to the practice that it is. And I think that this is a really good way to do that. And so those are kind of some of my, my ambitions around it. What about you, Phil?
Yeah, I second all of that. Selfishly, I think I was mentioning this before we were recording, but selfishly, this was also a means of self-education. I can listen to a bunch of podcasts and I could wait for somebody to ask, Ron St. Pierre the question that I want to ask him, or I could just ask him myself and get that information myself. Like I wish there was someone doing this, say when Bert Langerwerf was still around, right? Because, all I can think of is all of the outstanding herpetoculturists who have simply either gone completely under the radar or have passed away before we could get to them and say, hey, like, give us 4 or 5 hours of everything you can possibly tell us, right? I want to know. Like, there are so many good podcasts out there that are teaching people very simple stuff, respectfully so, simple concepts, care podcasts, short time frame, conversational stuff. But I don't really think there's any show out there that's serving this whole other area of hunger, which is there's a reams and reams and reels of tape that can come from just having a long conversation with some of these legends of our industry and people who knows how long they're going to be here. I mean, like, death can take any of us at any time. And it would be there's so many nuggets of gold and insight and motivation and inspiration that can come from having these kinds of conversations with people. I also want to reiterate what Roy said, which is, being given a sufficient amount of time and a sufficient amount of effort from us, we could have a platform that would allow us to contribute way, way more than we are currently to herpetoculture broadly. And obviously we have to remain open-minded to what that may or may not look like, but anything is going to be better than not, in my opinion. And I just think that, and also not just some of the heavy hitters, but there are also people who have a half a dozen animals who are knocking it out of the park. And those folks also never really get the same kind of voice or the same kind of exposure that that the heavy hitters of Instagram and YouTube do, because they're not clickbaiting and they're not throwing out catchy bullshit just to get Reels revenue and stuff like that, and again, there's nothing wrong with that per se. I get it. Everybody's got to pay their bills and stuff, but I would so much rather see a Reels video or a long-term conversation with somebody like Connor Jones and what he's up to and why he's doing what he's up to than seeing how close somebody gets to being bitten by a venomous snake or a big retic. I couldn't care less about that shit, And so I think that there were many motivators and many things that we think we can accomplish through this avenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all really well said. There's one other thing that kind of occurred to me that I want to add on this is just that. This is one of our. We have a recurring question that we ask all of our guests, and that is just very broadly, why herpetoculture? Mm-hmm. And this is something that I think that I feel really passionately about, is really exploring that question. Like, I don't think that like herpetoculture as a general community has really come up with a compelling and consistent answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And I think that the more kind of unified we are, and like the more we understand why we do this thing, why we're so dedicated and devoted to it, why it's so important, why it's such an enrichment to our lives and to society as a whole, the better situated we'll be as a unified front moving forward. And I think that that's something that I would really love just generally to see explored more within the herpetoculture community, is people talking about like, what's the reason you do this thing? What makes you tick about this? And why is it valuable? Why is this thing that we're doing important? Mm-hmm. Because it clearly, to so many of us, is so important, and like we're so devoted to it, and have so much respect for it. But I think that for some reason, there's a lot of like caginess and aloofness around like exploring the deeper reasons why we're doing this. And I think that it can kind of tie back into that conversation we had earlier about like the right to keep versus the privilege to keep reptiles. And anyway, I really think that that's something that I would hope to see our podcast could kind of encourage and nurture in the broader herpetoculture community. It's just thinking about why we do this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like sometimes asking that question, people interpret it as a moment to be defensive. Like, well, what do you mean? I have a million snakes. What's your problem? But instead, it's like more of an exploratory question. Like you said, we need to become better at answering that question. And that's something I've always used this analogy. Like if you got put on the stand at a court in court, and you were asked to justify herpetoculture in general, what would you say? How would you do it? And what do you hope your lawyer has as evidence in his folder that he can bring to court to swing the judge or the jury towards us? Rather, not to rag on morphs or bare bones rat keeping, but you really hope that your lawyer's briefcase is not just full of pictures of racks and different morphs. We got these. Well, sorry.
And the "don't tread on me" flag isn't going to do enough,
Yeah. So you're telling me that this is not enough to sway the jury.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's great, and have your damn "don't tread on me," but I'm just saying it's not. That is an insufficient. It's just not enough. And
exactly.
There's way more, and there's way more compelling reasons, and that those and having a better, even if it's not public, right? So yeah, we're gonna also have all this stuff where it'll help balance out, because I feel like most of the news we see within herpetoculture is, watch out, Louisiana, a new bill is coming, which is great. We need to have that, but it would also be really great to have like a lot more positive, forward thinking and genuinely things that reflect very well on our industry also spread out there and put out there. And if not on a broad public scale, even just getting that to individual people, mm-hmm. because, I go to the local reptile shops here, and sure, it's a very good thing that we have people who advertise when our industry might be threatened. And I want that to continue, but it would also be really cool if you went to a local reptile shop and they were playing your podcast. Mm-hmm. Damn trains, dude. Or playing your show, or giving you, nuggets of information about something cool that happened that we should all know about, because every individual herper will be benefited from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, rewilding projects or whatever it is. There's so many different positive aspects that.
Sorry.
Colorado and their trains.
I know, man.
Don't worry, that's the same as where I am too.
Okay, had none of them all morning, and then we had 3 in the last 20 minutes. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's no worries. And no, it's so true. I mean, our whole society is so focused on negative news that it's addicting to people. And yeah, it's we want to be highlighting areas where, a ban or a bill might be coming, but we certainly want to be talking more about the positives and what we can do better and or what has been done better. And I think I think that's really well said. There was something else I was going to say about that, but I think it's disappeared for now. But that's why the podcast that you guys are doing is so good, because it's also very different from my show, and it's different from what Liam is doing and Ellie, and as well as Bryce, and that's what I really like about the network that we're building together, is that every show is so different, and it's not like I'm bringing on another podcast to replicate the show that I do. It's very different, and you guys have connections with people that I don't have connections with, and bringing on some big names as well as, like you said, Phil, some smaller people that are doing great things, and I cannot wait to share it with people. I guess we probably don't want to say too many names. We've already said Ron St. Pierre. That's an episode that has been recorded. There's some amazing guests that are on deck that you guys are going to be recording hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Is there anything else we want to say about the podcast, or we want to leave it as more of a mysterious piece?
I think offering some mystery is the right way to go. I would like to add personally that I think it would be really great if once the show is launched and some folks get a chance to listen to it and see what we're doing and what we're about, at least I think we want suggestions. We want ideas. We want people to reach out to us and say, hey, who do you want us to talk to? Because, there's going to, Roy and I are just 2 guys, right? So, we kind of try our best to have our finger on the pulse of herpetoculture and know what's going on. But there's people we're going to overlook just because we just never saw what they were doing for one reason or another. And I would hope that it's not just relegated to the United States. I want to have on people from all over the world. I want to have on people who are controversial, and I want to have on people who are, extremely opinionated as well, because I think all of those things are necessary and important. And I don't want to shy away from any, I'd like to have on pretty much anybody you can think of. And even if it's somebody who I personally very much disagree with, I want to have them on the show because it's all valid in my opinion. And I'm just very interested in that kind of open platform,
Yeah. Is there anything on your side, Roy, that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was well said by Phil. Just, I would reiterate, just we welcome suggestions, welcome feedback. I'd also acknowledge that like Phil and I are both very new to this medium, and we're going to be ironing out the kinks for a little while, but we both have a progression mindset, and I know that like the quality of the show is only going to improve as we go. And so just would acknowledge that up front, and I would also just reiterate just the gratitude to you for being so willing to host our show and to like, and within that, like allow us to like inherit your listenership. There's a great amount of value in that, and it's not unnoticed.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, it's my pleasure, because I know the listeners will absolutely love the show. It's going to fit in right with the concepts that we're all sort of talking about, but we're talking about it in different ways. And, some people will be more accustomed to, or, gravitate towards a different way of speaking about the same concepts. And that's what I think is going to be so powerful about getting all this together. And as far for the listeners, this will be the same as any of the other shows in the network. If you subscribe on iTunes or Spotify or any podcasting app, they will all be there. They'll be labeled so you'll know what episode. If you're looking on Spotify, which is the best way I think to listen to podcasts, you can see the different artwork for each show. So you very easily differentiate between my show and everybody else. And then you guys will have a YouTube channel with the video version of the podcast as well. That's going to be coming released with the episodes.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess we can pretty much wrap up. I don't know if there's anything else we want to say. Maybe you guys could let everybody know where they can find the Instagram page at least, and the podcast will obviously be available on whatever you're listening to right now, or the YouTube channel. But why don't have we even said the name of the podcast?
No, we haven't.
Yeah. Why don't one of you guys announce the name of the podcast and then the Instagram page as well?
Unveil the name, Phil. It was your baby, so.
Here it is. Yeah. So it's called Project Herpetoculture, and it'll be at Project Herpetoculture on Instagram. I have that account up, and the YouTube will also be at Project Herpetoculture.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So it's not just like lizard podcast. No, it's awesome. And it's very sophisticated. Like the way you design the artwork is very sophisticated. It looks intriguing and mysterious as well. So I cannot wait for the people to listen to it. So thank you both for jumping on the podcast train, metaphorical train, not the ones that are blasting past Phil's. And we're so excited to see, I've already, behind the scenes, I know some of the people that you're going to have on, and it's some big names. I won't spoil it, but there's some big names. You guys have some cool connections, and I feel like it's a podcast that I will love to listen to. So I'm excited about that. So thank you both for joining me today. This was an awesome conversation. We dove into a bunch of different topics, and I cannot wait to see how the podcast grows and connects everybody in this wonderful space of herpetoculture.
Thank you, man.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you, Dylan.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Roy and Phil, thank you so much for such a great conversation. I didn't really have much of a plan when it came to this because I know you guys are so easy to chat with, and we can kind of delve into some philosophical items or philosophical conversation, and I really enjoyed that, and I think the listeners will have as well. We are all so excited for your podcast. So listeners, again, tomorrow, 24 hours from now, the Project Herpetoculture podcast will be launched. You can follow the video at the Project Herpetoculture YouTube channel, or just subscribe to Animals at Home Network on any podcasting app, and you will make sure that you receive those episodes right to your phone when they are released. If you are looking for more information on the podcast network, head to animalsathomenetwork.com. If you are interested in supporting the podcast on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. And again, thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this podcast. There are affiliate links in both the show notes and the YouTube description. And again, I am in the works of setting up an entire set with Custom Reptile Habitats enclosures, and it's been a lot of fun to put together. I've already recorded a bunch of videos, so I will be releasing those out throughout the fall. So if you're not subscribed on the YouTube channel, make sure you do that. Animals at Home, obviously. Hit the subscribe button so you can see me update those enclosures. And that is it for now. I will see you guys next episode.